Mexico is burning right now. In some areas, sports events are being canceled. Reports are coming in of raids on airports, flights being disrupted, gas stations are being targeted, roads are being shut down in cities, vehicles are being set on fire. Everyone is on edge. In the streets, it feels like the country is sliding toward civil war. But why? Because in Mexico, the death of a cartel leader is rarely just the death of one person. It is something far bigger than a name disappearing. It shifts power balances, triggers chains of revenge, and sends a message to the entire country. And if the person in question is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known to everyone as El Mencho, that shock multiplies. Because CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, came to represent a completely different phase of Mexico's cartel economy under El Mencho. A transition from the classic era of cocaine and marijuana to a new age defined by synthetic drugs and paramilitary organization. Reports say El Mencho's death happened at the peak of that era. So what is happening in Mexico right now? Let's look at it together. But first, one truth matters most. You cannot understand why this fire spread so fast without understanding El Mencho's story. Because don't dismiss it by saying just a cartel. Some groups today are no longer only criminal organizations, they function like narco-paramilitary forces. They don't merely carry guns, they pressure the state, fill the state's gaps, and in some places openly challenge the state. Now let's go back to the map. Rural Michoacan. For a child born in the 1960s, it was not simply a poor backwater town. It was a place where two economic tracks collided throughout the 20th century. On one side, legal agriculture, avocados, limes, and other crops. On the other, illegal production, smuggling, and organized crime. And the state was often present only on paper. On the ground, the rule was simple. Whoever financed the police shaped the order.
Delta 1.
Hey, ¿quién habla?
Mira bien, hijo de tu puta madre. Soy Mencho, güey.
¿Cómo?
Relaja tu puta gente a la verga. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tus putas partidas, si no te voy a partir tu madre, tienes toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey. ¿Cómo ves?
Ya está, señor, ahorita los bajo.
Oh, no cuelgues, hijo de la verga. Te tengo ubicado en Chacala, güey.
No le estoy colgando, le estoy diciendo, ahorita los bajo.
Póngase bien las pilas, güey. ¿Qué se le cuesta ser amigo, cabrón? ¿Uno no se mete con ustedes para que se pasen de verga?
No, señor, ahorita yo se las bajo.
Pongan, mire, revíremeles a todos los hijos de su puta madre, porque todos agarran dinero y son buenos de puercos.
Sí, es lo que me están
¿Se
diciendo.
me
Que
ponen a tiros o tú eres el primero que vas a marchar por ellos, León?
No, señor.
¿Vale?
No, señor, no se trata de eso.
Váyase a la verga, porque aquí los vergazos están al 220, ya se la sabe. Y miedo no hay.
No, señor, no se trata de eso. Ahorita yo los hago.
Entonces, si quiere la amistad, aquí va a tener un amigazo, cabrón. Si no, a chingar a su madre a la verga.
No, yo sé, señor.
Ya estoy hasta la verga de que no entiendan, loco.
El Mencho grew up inside that kind of sociological laboratory. His illegal crossing into the United States in the 1990s was not an ordinary immigrant story. These were the years when Mexican cartels were accelerating their integration into the U.S. market. It is known that he was convicted in the U.S. on a drug offense and later deported. But that process gave him something, an understanding of how the U.S. side works, and familiarity with border routes and systemic vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, in Western Mexico, the influence of the Milenio network was growing. We're talking about a structure that moved product to the U.S. market through Pacific ports and land routes. El Mencho began rising inside that world, no longer only within local production, but increasingly within logistics and security organization. There is an even more critical detail. There are accounts that he once served in a local police force. Like many cartel leaders in Mexico, he understood the security apparatus from the inside, its weak points, its routines, its blind spots. And that would later give him a major advantage. Then, in 2010, a vacuum opened in western Mexico. Power balances around Milenio broke, key figures fell, factions split apart, and El Mencho moved into that vacuum. Calling what he built New Generation was not just branding. Compared to older cartel structures, this was a more centralized, more disciplined, and more ruthless model. The first major factor that set CJNG apart was militarization. Armored convoys, 50 caliber heavy weapons, tactical uniforms. It looked like a state within a state, and the videos pushed out on social media. Some are difficult even to describe here, but the purpose was obvious: to impose psychological pressure on society and to tell rivals, "We are here." But the real turning point of the El Mencho era was this: the shift into synthetic drugs. That move rewired the cartel economy from top to bottom. It wasn't dependent on seasons and soil like agriculture. A laboratory, chemists, precursor chemicals, and logistics were enough. And the profits were astronomical. The global chain spread across a much larger map. A system in which certain precursor chemicals are allegedly sourced from Asia, synthesized in labs in Mexico, and then smuggled into the United States. That is why, from the U.S. perspective, El Mencho was never just a cartel boss. To Washington, he was one of the high-level targets at the top of a pipeline, feeding a public health crisis and causing billions in damage. That is why the U.S. offered multi-million-dollar rewards for information leading to his capture, levels rarely seen for an ordinary organized crime figure. But CJNG didn't stay limited to synthetics. It diversified its income by expanding into fuel theft, port control, extortion, human smuggling, and more. This wasn't a single-lane cartel anymore. It grew into something like a multi-layer criminal holding company. And then, reports spread that an operation was carried out in Jalisco with U.S. support, and that El Mencho was seriously wounded during that operation and died. Not every detail is clear, but the impact of the news was unmistakable. Because after the death report, there were reports of road closures, burned vehicles, and armed clashes in and around Jalisco. The state's strategy here is familiar. Take down the leader, and the structure collapses. Mexico has tried this approach repeatedly since 2006, but the result has often been the opposite of what was expected. When a leader falls, the organization does not always disappear. It may splinter, fracture into factions, or trigger a more uncontrolled wave of violence. Because central discipline weakens, lower commanders become more aggressive to protect their turf. Rival cartels test the vacuum. That's why El Mencho's death may not mean the end for CJNG. In the short term, it could mean even more chaos, and the timing of this is critical. Mexico is set to host the 2026 World Cup. When the world's eyes are on you, a shattered security image affects tourism, investment, and diplomatic pressure directly. Cartels understand this, and sometimes their message is simple. If you come after us, we can lock the entire country down. This is not new. There are historical parallels, and it's one of the reasons Latin American cartels have sometimes been described as narco-terror structures, because they pressure the state directly by targeting everyday life. El Mencho's ability to avoid capture for years was not just luck. Targets like this constantly relocate. They have safe houses and shelters. They control their environment. They buy local silence, and that makes them extremely difficult to catch. Now everyone is asking the same question: who takes over CJNG? Will the structure consolidate quickly or fragment into a more uncontrolled, unpredictable violence? On a global level, the question being discussed is this: can this level of chaos be tolerated in a country where World Cup matches are supposed to be played within months? This is exactly the pressure cartels want: to squeeze the agenda, the economy, security, and international perception all at once. So what does everything happening right now tell us? Even when a major leader is reported killed, a cartel does not instantly collapse. Sometimes, the most dangerous phase begins right then. What we are seeing now looks like a full-scale hell scene in Mexico, and the next chapter of this story will be written less by gunfire and more by one thing: who takes the throne? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments.